Everybody, happy 2022. It still feels like we're living 2020 and 2021 here. It's nice to see a large group of so many familiar names and friends here. So let me start. First of all, I want to start by always taking the opportunity to publicly appreciate the very many dedicated individuals of the Portland Public Schools. This includes our principals, school leaders, educators, school support staff, our nutrition workers, drivers, custodians, many others. All of them, the combination, that collective effort has really enabled us to navigate all the continued complexities and challenges of this pandemic. I want to make sure and start with that appreciation. We believe the school district, Portland Public Schools, has continued to be assertive since the spring of 2020, to be proactive, to put into place the array of health and safety mitigation measures to keep the health and safety of our employees, our students, and our broader school communities safe. Despite our best efforts to keep the COVID spread contained on our school campuses, we're observing, all of us in the broader Portland community, the continued and increasing impact of COVID-19, in particular, the Omicron variant right now. It's affecting our school system and that broader community. As we shared last night with the Portland Public Schools community, we're observing that dramatic rise. We're seeing the increase in reported absences of our students and our staff across our schools this week. In observing the growing number of staff reporting out for today, Friday, January 7th, which could not be covered, we had to make the necessary decision to close Cleveland and McDaniel high schools today and transition to distance learning starting next Monday, the 10th, through Friday, January 14th. Now, the increase in absences adds a burden to our already compromised capacity as a school district. Because of the finite number of substitute teachers and central office staff available to fill in those remaining positions, these groups of employees themselves, they're also being impacted by COVID-related absences as well. So the ability to fully staff and safely operate our schools is a key factor that has resulted in the very difficult decision to temporarily transition, in this case, 2 of our comprehensive high schools where COVID cases are high, to distance learning. Now, I want to state emphatically, as superintendent of Oregon's largest school district, responsible for the close to 50,000 students, I want to be very clear. Our goal is to keep our school buildings open and to maintain in-person instruction as much as possible, so we can surround our young people with the caring educators, the essential support services, so that our young scholars can access the learning, which is our core mission, and the full range of school activities that engage our students, all of it, as long as we can do so safely. We consider the closure of our schools to in-person learning and activities to be a measure of last resort. As we shared last night, district leaders meet regularly with local public health officials to continue monitoring the COVID-19 situation, and we're closely monitoring and tracking that data to determine COVID's impact on staff coverage in our schools. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Renard Adams, who serves as our Chief of Research Assessment and Accountability, who's going to share with you some of the other factors and criteria that goes into our decision-making process.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good afternoon, everyone. We're closely monitoring each school, and we'll be taking into account the following considerations over the next several days to determine if other schools or classrooms will need to transition to distance learning. There's not one single number or data point on its own that will determine whether to make a transition, as we're looking at multiple data points. For example, we are currently monitoring the number of staff who test positive for COVID-19, the number of students who are testing positive for COVID-19, the number of staff and students who are in quarantine, the number of staffing vacancies, the number of staffing vacancies that are not covered by a substitute educator, the number of additional certified staff available to cover vacancies. We have considerations for our special programs and additional information such as regional public health metrics, rapidly changing guidance, et cetera. And looking at our COVID-19 dashboard, there are lags in data due to counting on the self-reports and the volume of the reports. Contact tracing can also take up to 48 hours. But as of today, for student numbers, approximately 754 students are isolated due to COVID-19. 526 students are in quarantine due to an offsite exposure, and 5 students are isolated due to quarantine due to an on-site exposure. Staff and student and substitute teacher numbers are as follows. Approximately 169 staff members are in isolation. 58 staff members were in quarantine due to an off-site exposure, and 2 staff are quarantined due to an on-site exposure. Approximately 435 substitute teacher requests have been received, and 263 of those requests were filled. 172 were not filled, and those classrooms were staffed with other licensed educators. The district has been deploying licensed central office staff to classrooms. If a school cannot open safely due to COVID-19's impact on staff and coverage in schools, we might need to make the very difficult decision to temporarily transition to distance learning. It is important to be aware that there is a rising number of COVID cases in our region and that there's currently a backlog of reporting and contact tracing to determine staff or students who need to isolate or quarantine. Our COVID-19 dashboard will continue to be updated as information becomes available. The PPS COVID-19 dashboard displays the count of cases entered into the system each day. Data are entered by school staff and MESD nurses as cases are reported to them. Due to the nature of contact tracing, as I mentioned earlier, the data on the dashboard may lag by at least 48 hours, With the surge in cases caused by the Omicron variant and ongoing staffing shortages, both school staff and MESD nurses are reporting that contact tracing and data entry are taking longer than would otherwise be anticipated. What we currently see in monitoring our data is that as staff and student COVID cases rise, so does student and staff absenteeism. Now we'll turn it over to Dr. Cheryl Proctor, who will share what transitions to distance learning may look like. Dr. Proctor.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. So as we've made some of these decisions and as we continue to assess the data, in the event of a temporary transition to distance learning, principals and teachers will contact students and families directly with more information about what their daily schedules would look like, the academic and extracurricular activities also that would be scheduled. To give students and families a sense of what this would be and what it would look like, we offer a set of guidelines and guardrails. So, for example, day 1 serves as a transition day. After receiving notification that a school would be transitioning to temporary distance learning, it is important for us to ensure, again, that students are able to access featured content. So please know that the first full day following that notification, students will be able to go to Canvas and Seesaw so that they can access their, again, featured content. Educators will also have an opportunity during this transition day to plan for distance learning. Schools will set up and staff will have a help desk available for students and families to access technology and digital resources. In the event a school is hosting a pre-K program, or it involves our pre-K learners, our early learners, preschool teachers will meet synchronously with students for morning meetings and small group instructions. Family will have access to our pre-K remote learning website. It's designed to provide families with age-appropriate activities to engage 3 to 5-year-olds in home learning during the temporary transition to distance learning. In grades K to 5, teachers will meet synchronously with students and conduct instruction, as we are really committed to ensuring that there is continuity in learning for students. Teachers will provide whole class and small group instruction, as well as prepare independent work for students. In grades 6 through 12, teachers and classes will meet remotely via Google Meet and Zoom during their regularly scheduled class time. Students, teachers, will contact them with more information about the daily schedule and learning activities that are prepared for them and accessible to them via Canvas and Seesaw. So students, should plan to attend each and every class and each and every class period virtually as they would if they were on campus. When it comes to decisions about extracurricular activity, all extracurricular activities will be temporarily paused, including athletics and performing arts during the time of the temporary distance learning period. Essential services are going to continue. We really prioritize access to essential services during distance learning for our families and our communities. This includes nutrition services, our on-campus health centers, teen parent centers, and technology support for students. Breakfast and lunch will be offered to students for pickup while students are in temporary distance learning. This year, students have been issued a PPS Chromebook as a part of our one-to-one Chromebook take-home initiative. If a student still needs a device, they would contact their school and they would be issued a device for them to utilize during the temporary distance learning process. Additionally, PPS technical support will remain available to families and students during that time. Our health centers, as noted before, will remain open, and we really want to be mindful of the significant impact that comes from moving a school to temporary distance learning. Please know that we want to keep as many of our students in school as possible, as nearly 2 years of research show just the impact that COVID-19 and remote learning has had on schools and also on our students. It really shows that schools is the best place for our students to be. It is the place where they can feel supported, where academically, socially, mentally, physically, and emotionally, we can wrap around our arms around our students and take care of their learning needs and their other needs as well. So where we can't offer sufficient staff to continue this on-site presence and this on-site instruction for safety and ensure a safe environment, we then will have to look at a case-by-case, class-by-class, school-by-school, look at implementing temporary distance learning until we can get to a space of safely reopening school and bringing our students back for face-to-face learning.
Thank you, Dr. Proctor. Now we will open up the media briefing for questions from reporters. Just as a reminder, we will call on reporters in the order that you RSVP'd. You'll have the opportunity to ask one question and one follow-up question. If there are multiple reporters from one media outlet, we will ask the first person who RSVP'd and go down the line once we have time at the end, if there is time. With that, the first question is for KGW. Please go ahead.
For KGW, thanks for doing this and being available for questions. I'm just curious, I know it's a quickly developing situation with Omicron and COVID and all that, but how likely is it that there will be additional closures based on the numbers you're monitoring right now? I mean, are there schools that are particularly high on the list?
Well, we continue to monitor the numbers with key staff multiple times throughout the day. And it really is a dynamic situation. There would be moments where it looks like a school would be high if it was on the list due to staff shortages or due to high cases. But for example, in the instance of a staff shortage, when we make an intensive effort to ensure that we are deploying our certified staff and making coverages available, we find then that that class or that school would no longer rise to that high level. So it really is an ever-changing situation. That's why we value, just monitoring the data and utilizing and focusing our resources towards supporting schools. And then from there, we'll be able to see which schools emerge with the highest need.
And just as a quick follow-up, I know that, teachers got today as a transition to kind of plan for the next week. But is there any kind of district protocol that's kind of, or even school by school protocol that kind of lays it out like, hey, these are the things teachers need to do, or do teachers just have today to figure it all out and troubleshoot and then try to be ready?
So, the good news is that, we really value the professionalism of our teachers. And the other piece of good news is that, because this is a temporary transition to distance learning, we are not putting any requirements to shift schedules in a major way. So the day that is offered for teachers to transition and to plan is a day where they are able to come in, for example, into the school setting, make sure that they have the resources necessary, and take the full scale of the day to prepare for the next weeks of online distance learning. And because, their schedules would not really digress from what the their regular consistent schedule would be, they have an opportunity to continue the education and the learning practices and activities that they had previously planned for students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from COIN. Please go ahead. Whoever has signed on for COIN.
Hey, yeah, this is Liz Birch with COIN right now. I'm wondering if you anticipate that these distance learning procedures would go on for longer than a week at a time, or how long the schools that are currently transitioning into that will be in distance learning.
So, because we're looking at a number of different points of data, the decisions could be in the instance of today, for example, because of the number of student and staff cases that we're seeing at a particular school. In that instance, it is pretty clear that we follow our health advisors in setting the guidelines for what an appropriate time of quarantine or distance learning would look like. In addition, what we have decided to do in an effort to stay on top of the situation and ensure that we could come back to face-to-face learning as soon as possible, we're also incorporating a test to return. If it's a situation where there is a high staff shortage and we're unable to pool our resources to support a particular school, that may be more of a temporary measure and would not call for a full stretch of days. But it really is, again, because of how dynamic the situation is and how it shifts from hour to hour throughout the day. It's really hard to call for any one particular school what that decision would be, but it would always be grounded in the data and grounded on the advice of our health advisors.
Can you expand on the test to return, what exactly that would mean? Is it for students, faculty, everyone?
Yeah, so if there is a high number of cases and we have determined that we need to go to distance learning for a period of the week, for example, in the case of Cleveland and McDaniel, we want to continue to monitor those caseloads as they come in, but we also want to monitor to what degree we find negative results in testing. So what we plan to do as a district is to deploy resources and staff throughout the community so that we could have the students and staff tested, offer testing for them so that we could determine the number of negative results, and also dig deeper into the caseload data to see by what period of time would the quarantine be lifted. If we find that we reach a particular threshold of negative cases, then we may be able to return to face-to-face instruction sooner. And likewise, depending on the results of our monitoring of the cases at those particular schools, it may even call for another decision. So we really do use that data and testing data to make the decision as to how soon we could return to face-to-face instruction.
Thank you. Next question, Isabel Garcia with Portland Mercury.
Hi, thank you. Given you're saying that the dynamic monitoring situation could change hour to hour, how will you know when a school situation is, I guess, stable enough to return to in-person learning? And what would the transition back to in-person learning look like is it an additional transition day? What would that look like?
Yeah, so similar to how we set criteria for making the decision to move to temporary distance learning, there is a set of steps that we would take to determine whether or not it is safe to return. The first is to, again, monitor the cases that are coming out of any particular school. The second would be to administer additional COVID tests for staff and students to monitor closely to the negative results that come back. And then once we make a determination that it's time to transition back to face-to-face, we will coordinate with the school leaders and the school community to set the plans in motion so that we can ensure that students and staff alike are fully prepared for the return.
Great, thank you. And given the recent approval of booster shots for kids 12 and up, does the district plan on holding any vaccination events like when vaccines were first authorized for kids?
Well, I think you've seen Portland Public Schools, as I mentioned in my opening, to be proactive about that. And so if those could be made available, then we'll continue to coordinate with our local public health officials. We've had some great partnerships with some of the local hospitals and health providers in making those accessible, especially in some of our communities, that could really appreciate having that access brought out to their school community. So if that's something we can help facilitate, that's something we're very interested in making available.
Thank you. Next question, Genevieve Rayom with KATU. Please go ahead.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Quick question about, kind of a follow-up to one of the previous questions, but do you know specifically how many other schools in the district are at risk or leaning towards possibly having to do distance learning in the near future? Is there a number that you are monitoring?
Well, what I can say is just because there's been such variability, and our Chief of Human Resources, Sharon Reese, is here with us. Even as we looked at the numbers yesterday, we made the call on 2 high schools, but there were several others that also were concerning, but where we felt that we could cover those absences. Unfortunately, it looks like we may have other schools where we'll need to go through our decision-making process and work with our school leaders there to decide if that's the right call. I don't think anybody in the broader community is going to be surprised that unless the conditions improve, and we can guarantee consistency of staffing, that there may be additional school communities where we need to transition temporarily to distance learning.
Do you plan to make those schools public? Because in this situation, you notified parents around 9:30 last night. I mean, they have to lift tremendous loads to accommodate distance learning. So shouldn't you be alerting parents, even if their school is close to transitioning to distance learning?
Certainly, Genevieve, as a parent, I'd want to know as early as possible, but sometimes we don't know because hour by hour, those sub requests are coming in. And part of that is what occurred yesterday. But Sharon, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, I will. I'm a parent of Portland Public School students. So Genevieve, your question is near and dear to my heart. At this point in time, we don't, while we are communicating with families, we communicated with all families last night. We communicated with families again today, and we will continue to do so about what to expect if we do have to transition into distance learning. So we're trying to prepare our families. We're also working with our principals and our staff to be ready to make this transition. This is a last resort decision, only when we can't safely open schools. So we are trying to get everybody prepared for that worst case and avoid it at all costs. At this point in time, we do not have additional schools that we are closing on Monday, but we are going to very carefully, as we have been every day, watch all of the numbers and the indicators and the factors that Dr. Adams walked through earlier throughout the weekend, so we can give as much notice as is humanly possible.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that.
Next question, Elizabeth Miller with OPB. Please go ahead.
Thank you. In terms of trying to kind of get to the root of the problem, which is in part staffing, I mean, does the district have any further plans to try to bring in even more subs? Could you talk a little bit about how that effort has been going and whether there are any other plans to try to fix the staffing shortage or make it better? Thanks.
Thank you for your question, Elizabeth. Yes, this is a question that has been plaguing us all year. We continue to have large shortages compared to prior years for our substitute educators and large shortages of our paraeducators who help with our special education students and special education teachers. As you know, we continue to be challenged with our bus drivers and with custodial staff. All of those areas are the subject of intense interest and focus in terms of recruiting and processing, hiring and that sort of thing. The reality is that we do not have a lot of candidates for those positions. So we are actively assertively pursuing candidates for that, and the yield is not high, but we are not giving up. We have a number of efforts that we are continuing to push forward.
So it's worth mentioning that our HR department has been proactive about the new flexibility around emergency licensed substitutes. So tell a friend, PPS is hiring. We do have some additional folks that are in the final stages of some training to be certified to be out at schools, but this human capital variable has afflicted every school district across the country and of course in other sectors and industries, and it isn't any different here in K-12, but this is the key variable, and this is the one that's confronting us right now and why we're having to make these necessary decisions.
And how many emergency substitutes has PPS brought on?
So we have a large number of emergency substitute applications and candidates. What we've found is that we haven't had a high yield for those. So currently we have 56 active substitute educators on an emergency license, and we have another 174 in some phase of hiring on. We've also instituted additional incentives for our substitute educators to pick up additional work. And I want to give a shout out to the teachers, administrators, and school staff who are leaning in every day and have been since the beginning of the school year to cover other substitute needs and other classroom needs. They've done a remarkable job of leaning into that as we faced this substitute shortage.
Thank you. Next question, Julia Silverman with Portland Monthly. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you all so much for doing this. My question's for Dr. Guerrero, and I think probably also for Sharon Reese. It's totally understandable that the dashboards lag, given how difficult it's been to track this and how transmissible Omicron is. But given the mismatch of numbers there versus the number of teachers who called out specifically today, I'm wondering whether it is either of your sense that this is not Portland Association of Teachers, but perhaps a response that has some relation to labor negotiations and some of the specific asks that the teachers union has had around planning time and COVID safety protocols. Thank you.
You cut out just a little bit, Julia, so I apologize if I didn't hear your entire question. That's okay. I think I got the gist of it. What we saw, I don't have reason to believe that this has anything to do with our negotiations with the Portland Association of Teachers. What we are seeing in our absences, both for students and staff, is correlated with what we're seeing in Omicron and COVID cases across the county and across the state. So all the information that we have indicates that this is about increases in COVID, have people having come back from traveling, people coming back into school, New Year's Eve parties, like all of our cases are increasing exponentially at the times we would anticipate that they would. If this were related to negotiations, I don't think we would have seen lower numbers earlier in the week. We're seeing higher numbers later in the week, and that's very much associated with what we're seeing with COVID.
Thank you. And if I could quickly follow up, I'm wondering, from what we can see from the dashboards, it's certainly true that on-site transmission is so much less than off-site. Wouldn't that argue for keeping schools open because the district has done a really thorough job with its layered safety protocols, and perhaps both teachers and students could be safer in school?
Well, we agree with you in a sense, Julia. Thanks for getting the word out early yesterday. But because of all of our, instituted mitigation measures, that transmissibility, that our campuses haven't proven to be super spreaders. But if that were the reason alone to account for the staff absences, I think what Sharon was just describing, there's a myriad of reasons, and we'd have to quiz each individual here as to why it is that they're not able to perform their duties on a given day. We want to be able to give confidence to our students, their families, and our employees that our campuses and our workplaces are healthy, safe places to be. And I think that's what has gotten PPS through this pandemic this far. So I think the reasons are many as to why an individual might not be able to report to work.
I also think it's important to note that the decisions and the criteria that you just heard the district leaders walk through are really not about, we think spread is happening at school. That's not what is happening here. It's that we don't think we can safely staff and open those campuses to in-person instruction. So that is the variable, and that is partly due to the quarantine requirements that keep staff and students off campus. Those are really the driving factors not a concern that we don't have what we think are excellent measures, some of the best available to mitigate any spread within our buildings.
So will
Thank
the
you. Next question. Oh, did you have a third question, Julia? Or go ahead.
That's not really fair, but will the district be considering moving to a 5-day quarantine period as the CDC has recommended? Sorry.
Guadalupe, you're on mute.
I think district leaders around the state are anxious to hear, and certainly for those of us in Multnomah County, what the new refreshed guidance or not might be there. Obviously, that has in some ways a beneficial impact for us if that quarantine period gets halved. You can imagine that assists us with being able to staff our schools. So we're anxiously awaiting. We hear there might be some communication that we can expect, but we're waiting to learn more from our public health officials.
Thank you. Pauline Aguilar with KPTV. Apologies if I did not pronounce your name correctly.
That's okay, thank you. In regards to, say, if these two high schools have to continue virtual learning past Friday, when is your deadline to notify parents?
We would revisit the schools and again continue to monitor what's happening within the schools. We don't have a prescribed deadline at this point, but we will be looking at data as early as Wednesday and looking at our ability to test for negative results in the majority of our students and staff. And then as soon as we're able to make a decision and notify families, we absolutely will.
It goes to the earlier question. We want to give our families as much advance notice as possible. You know, superintendents used to think calling a snow day was the toughest challenge in getting the word out. And, you know, if we can give our families as much notice, hopefully before going into the following weekend when they're expecting to return on Monday, whether that in fact is going to be the case or it needs to be extended, you know, to Dr. Proctor's point, we'll continue to look at the best information we have available. But you heard earlier, this is a staffing consistency issue. And so, you know, if you ask me today, if staffing looked like on Monday, I'm going to probably have a very different picture and answer to that if you ask me on Sunday night. And that's what makes this difficult, is that sometimes, like last night, we have to make that call in the 11th hour, which is never anybody's preference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, Courtney Vaughn with the Portland Tribune. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I guess want to clarify, vaccinated students and staff are not expected to quarantine after an exposure to a positive case, correct?
That is correct.
So looking in the dashboard, is it safe to assume that the majority of students and staff who are quarantined for exposure are unvaccinated?
I don't know
Sarah,
that we would.
you're on mute.
I think Dr. Adams is probably closer to that analysis than I am. Dr. Adams?
Sure. I don't know that we can make that conclusion from the dashboard because it's as most people look at it, it's a rolling count across multiple days. And so we know that the quarantine period and when a case is reported to us don't necessarily coincide with the first day that someone had the symptoms and got the test. So I would not make that assumption.
Okay, and then just to clarify, Dr. Proctor touched on using the test to return as potentially a way to bring back students after a school's been closed. So is that, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like the test to return program might be used for both vaccinated and unvaccinated students. Is that correct? Because I know initially they said it was primarily for unvaccinated students. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how that will work.
Right. We will make the offer and set up to have the test for return for the school community. And we will make the determination again, just based on those results. What we will follow the guidelines that have been set by our Chief of Student Support Services to ensure that we're following through with the test to return protocol. And if that means for both vaccinated and unvaccinated, then that would be the case.
Thank you. Next question, Betsy Hammond with the Oregonian, or whoever you'd like to designate.
I'll go ahead and take that. I know there are several of us on here. I want to go back to what Julia asked about, and again, to ask you to more explicitly address the mismatch. The dashboard shows at Cleveland and McDaniel that fewer than 10% of students and of staff members are out for a COVID protocol, whether that's quarantine or isolation. So it would seem that the high degree of absences are for reasons other than a need for, with the COVID situation, to be away from school. Can you address that head on?
I will take that question if Dr. Adams has anything to add. What we know is that this is not just COVID season, it's also flu season and cold season. And we are asking people, and have been since the beginning of the pandemic, that if they have any symptoms, really, even if we don't yet have COVID positive tests, to be able to identify something as COVID related absence and have that assurance. What we know is that people are experiencing a high degree of symptoms that exclude them, if they are following our protocols for safety, COVID safety, exclude them from coming onto campus. So one of the challenges is the lack of testing, so that we can determine whether or not somebody's sore throat is a result of COVID or it's a result of a common cold.
And as a follow-up, what are the abilities of students and of staff members to opt to raise their hands and say, I need a sub, or to say, I can't come to school today? I know that the state rules say that students who don't attend for 10 days in a row are dropped. I know that you maybe have sick leave banks that are shared, but in general, how long can a student or a staff member say, hey, my throat hurts, I can't come to school, I'm afraid of giving COVID, I can't come to school, just things aren't well with me, I need a sub? What's the length of time, or what's the parameters around which students and employees may do that?
I'll take that question with regard to staff and defer with regard to requirements regarding students. Of course, in the context of COVID, we are requiring staff to not come on site if they are demonstrating any symptoms or if they are subject to any sort of quarantine. The staff are required to work their contract year. And any absences within their contract year need to be related to an enumerated list of items. Those include illness, right now COVID. We certainly have staff that have had to take the sort of standard things you would expect with any employee, with any human being. Funeral leave, those parental leave. There's a myriad of identified reasons that staff can have an excused absence from their contract year.
In regard to student absences, we look at student excused versus unexcused absences. Any point that a student has an excused absent, meaning that there's a notification and we understand why the student is out of school. If they are ill, then the student has opportunity to make up their schoolwork. We also have provisions in place for students who have other chronic needs. that may require them to miss multiple school days. And we work very closely with our Office of Student Support Services to ensure that we have a degree of educators, whether it be hospital homebound or anything of those programs to support those students. So there's not necessarily a cap for students who demonstrate an excused absence and demonstrate that they can, of course, return and make up their assignments.
Super. I'd like to just pull a quick Julia Silverman and ask a third question, which is just to ask for a commitment from someone. Ariane usually coordinates that, to provide us with the absentee data from the two schools, both for students and for employees, that we requested earlier today. If I could just get a thumbs up or a yes, that would be great.
Yes, we will. I need to check with our experts here and we will get back to you today.
Thank you.
Next question with Rachel Monahan with Willamette Week. Please go ahead.
So you mentioned earlier in the call, I'm forgetting who it was. It may have been, anyway, that something about contact tracing. How is that working at this point to notify students? Has the county been doing some of that work to date? Because I understand they've walked away from a bunch of their contact tracing work. Are they still doing it for schools?
Contact tracing is being done by both school staff and MESD nurses. And so that's how that process is currently working.
So that'll remain unchanged at this point. Families will still be notified if the same way they have been in the past.
Yes.
We have also added contact here within the district. We added staff for contact tracing in anticipation that we needed to relieve school staff of that burden, and because of Omicron, the surge has been very high.
Any other questions, Rachel?
I mean, I can keep going, but the question I had that my colleagues in the press have been asking about are, do you have any indication that some of these absences are based on concern about the stage of the pandemic we're in, like that staff have, vulnerable members of their household at home, or, children under 5 who can't be vaccinated yet, or that kind of nature of absences?
Well, I can't rule that out. I am not hearing that sort of concern. It's quite a bit different than in the early stages of the pandemic before vaccines, when that was a significant concern. I think, so I'm not hearing indicators of that. I can't rule that out, but I'm not hearing indicators of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I believe we've gotten through every media outlet and we are past time. If you have not gotten your questions answered, please send an email to mediarelations@pps.net and we will get back to you as soon as possible. We appreciate everybody taking time to join us, and we hope that you will share this information so that families are prepared in the coming weeks, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.